Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another fantastic Revieve product launch event. I'm personally very excited for you to join us today because today we won't be just revealing the latest and greatest new product from our product team, but we'll be featuring exciting content and discussions from industry thought leaders and experts on the future of beauty and the trends that we see happening in the industry. As you hopefully know, at Revieve, we work with both brands and retailers, enabling them to deliver a hyper-personalized brand experience across 5 continents and every channel where they interact with their consumers. And today, we're especially focused on the very topical and exciting category of color cosmetics. After a few very exceptional years where makeup as a category really struggled during the pandemic, consumers are now finding their way back to the category. But the consumers are no longer the same, and neither is the category. We think that some aspects of color cosmetics have fundamentally changed. As an example, consumers of makeup today really value personalization and expect a hyper-personal experience from their brands or their retailers. They value self-expression and diversity, which are becoming key concepts for brands and retailers alike. And also, the consumer journey is becoming more complex. According to Salesforce, the consumer journey for makeup consists of 9 separate steps, ranging across different channels, across brand touchpoints, and is becoming very, very complicated for brands and retailers to recognize how, where, and when the consumers prefer to interact with their brand and ultimately buy. And the beauty consumer today is savvier than ever, both from a technology as well as an information standpoint. Now, what that means for brands is that digitalization is here to stay and has become a core competence for beauty brands and retailers. And from a research standpoint, according to data from the Pull agency, more than 80% of consumers are doing proactive research across a number of different channels before making a purchase decision. And in addition, the brand experience that you deliver to your consumer audience doesn't just need to be personal. It needs to be aligned with your brand purpose and needs to mirror what you represent as a brand or retailer. The makeup industry is going through what we believe is a fundamental transformation, a move away from the attention economy into an experience economy. And in this new world, brands and retailers need to rethink how they provide value to their audience and how they engage the consumer moving forward. In the old economy, personalization was an opportunity. In this new world, personalization is an expectation in order for brands and retailers to stay relevant for their audience. We've reimagined the digital makeup advisor experience and how brands and retailers can engage all makeup shoppers in this new economy. And without further delay, I'm proud to present the AI Makeup Advisor.
Today's global and omnichannel market for makeup allows you as a brand or retailer to interact with your customers anywhere and at any time. But as a result, it's easy to lose visibility to your customers as they are only a tap away from endless options, and they bounce between different touchpoints and channels. And while in previous years, personalization was simply an option, it has now become a requirement. To personalize effectively, you need to understand and anticipate the needs of your customers. That's why we created the AI Makeup Advisor, the market-leading digital makeup experience for brands and retailers that enables you to hear, see, and empower all your customers. With Revive's AI Makeup Advisor, you as a brand can deliver value beyond your amazing products by creating an intimate environment where your customers can discover themselves, purchase with confidence, and strengthen the relationship they have with your brand. And for you as a retailer, AI Makeup Advisor allows you to create seamless and personalized experiences between in-store and online retail. and get your wide range of color cosmetics in front of the ideal customers automatically and accurately. Put your customers in focus and understand what their needs and intentions are at that exact moment. Get a holistic understanding of who your customers are with the most reliable AI selfie analysis. And make your customers own their beauty by helping them find exactly what they're looking for with AI-powered personalized recommendations, optimized true-to-life virtual try-on, and engaging, educating brand content, all in the same experience. Revive's AI Makeup Advisor experience unlocks unparalleled first-party consumer data, enabling you to gain intelligence on how your customers interact with your brand across all touchpoints, making your customer journeys more predictable than ever before. AI Makeup Advisor, a personalized, digital-powered makeup experience that engages all your makeup shoppers and drives growth for your brand. Powered by Revieve.
The AI Makeup Advisor has everything the consumer needs in order to make a confident makeup purchase. And as a brand or retailer, you're able to hear, see, and empower the consumer in order to build lasting, intimate, one-to-one relationships at scale. The dynamic and ever-evolving makeup industry is full of opportunities for brands and retailers, but also represents significant challenges in today's environment. And to take a deeper look, we've invited two very special guests to join us today in a discussion about where the makeup industry stands and how brands and retailers can overcome the current challenges that they're facing.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining our excellent panel discussion today. My name is Sampo Parken. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Revieve. And today with me, I have two very special guests from the beauty industry. Hannah Keast, first of all, she's the head of growth and innovation at the Pull Agency, which is the leading creative agency for health and beauty brands. She has an extensive experience working in the beauty space, working with Pull and a lot of emerging brand clients based out of the UK. And I also have with me today Ross Beagrie, who is the commercial director of a beauty tech startup, very exciting beauty tech startup called Decipher, that specializes in custom-made, personalized cosmetics products. And before Decipher, Ross has spent over 20 years experience working with both Fortune 500 companies as well as startups, and was recently the general manager at Beauty Bay. So welcome both Hannah and Ross to the panel discussion. Really excited to have you both with me today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
So first off, I want to start by some sort of targeted questions about what's going on in the beauty industry and digitalization. And let's start with you, Hannah. Through your work with the Pull Agency, I mean, you get to work with a lot of exciting beauty brands, and you get to see a lot of the challenges that these beauty brands have today in today's environment. What would you say are some of the main challenges when it comes to digitalization and technology adoption that the beauty brands that you work with have, and why do you think those are challenges?
Yeah, I think so. I think first of all, it's worth talking about the landscape. So, if we look at kind of e-commerce, even just a few years ago, 2019. The kind of total e-commerce accounted for about 19.2% of total retail. And then obviously the pandemic happened, everything kind of changed. And I think for us, what we have seen, the biggest change that has put more pressure on brands is that the digital experiences online had to evolve very, very rapidly. So we actually saw a leap of about 5 years worth of growth in that space in 12 months. So, what that kind of meant was that the online user was 5 years more savvy. They had 5 years more expectations. They wanted kind of that personalized experience, and they were happy to part with their data on the basis that we remembered what they'd looked at last time. We understood their color preferences. We made kind of future recommendations. And I think because of that, there's been this kind of building pressure for brands to actually keep up be seen to innovate, be seen to drive forward. And I think all of those changes and the rate that they've come at, it's been quite overwhelming for a lot of brands. And I think there's been kind of a reluctance to really understand, just how easy it is to actually adopt some of these technologies. There's kind of always this assumption that when you're looking at the leaders like L'Oreal, where they are absolutely, as part of their mission, trying to be seen as innovators in that space and kind of referring to themselves as a digital, a tech-based company. And I think that's kind of really had an impact on a lot of other brands when it comes to their willingness to kind of try in this area. And so it's about having, a good strategy, a good understanding of what's going on, not only in the landscape, but more importantly, what the consumers want. I think sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect between what people believe consumers want and what they actually want. And all we really want is a quicker experience online to get us to the outcome a lot faster. We've all become a bit impatient, I think, in kind of this online process. And I think so for me, that's the biggest thing that I think brands have had to get their head around, the biggest challenge, and then kind of spending a lot of time to give them the confidence that it's actually okay to kind of look at partnering when it comes to these technologies, rather than just building and creating your own all the time.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, and I do have to agree. I think the pace of change that really COVID has forced these brands to accommodate, it has been something that has really sort of forced them out of their comfort zone in the sense that the speed at which they need to sort of catch up to the consumer, as you said, the sort of digitally savvy consumer that all of a sudden expects a lot more than yesterday. So 5 years more for something that seems like yesterday. So I think that's a very, very, very valuable point, definitely. So Ross, looking at your perspective on this, I mean, you're obviously, creating, personalized, custom-made cosmetics, and you're driving that sort of hyper-personalization forward. Beyond what sort of Hannah mentioned, what do you think are some of the drivers for that? The sort of personalized experience, that the consumers are craving for, and obviously hyper-personalization being part of that. So what's your view on that?
Well, personalization is obviously a huge topic that covers everything from the very beginning of the journey through to the end product. If we talk from our perspective, our research shows that consumers they expect a level of personalization now, more and more so. They'll be more loyal to a brand that can deliver it, which is important. And significantly, we're not just talking double-digit percentages of consumers, these big numbers. We know they'll pay more. We know they'll be, as I say, more loyal. And we know that market drivers like inclusivity are here to stay. And not just that, but sustainability and other factors within the market are putting more and more pressure on brands to be able to deliver these experiences in a socially responsible way in many different aspects. And that puts a lot of pressure on brands, and particularly retailers, on their current model. That the current approach is, well, if we look at foundation as an example, which is where we currently focus, to add more shades to your range is extremely expensive. And it's not very sustainable because it means more wastage. And if you look at Pareto's rule, the 80-20, you're still only going to sell a small number of the outline products and shades. So we set out to create a personalized experience at Decipher that is more than just a shade tweak. So we find that most consumers will compromise in at least one area, if not several. They might find the right shade, they might find the right coverage, the right finish, might be right for their skin type. But at least one of those aspects isn't there for them. And that's what takes us from being personalized to hyper-personalized. And as we develop as a business and as technology develops, we expect to create a more immersed, a more engaged experience start to finish, rather than just anything that's gone previously, which is we add a few ingredients and that's your personalized product. Now, what's really important in the way that we've approached is, we were really about the personalization. We weren't about the sustainability. However, as things have developed and the more you talk to retailers and the more the market develops, sustainability is huge, massively important for all of us. Consumers, particularly as you move into younger generations, are calling brands out and expect a more sustainable and socially responsible approach, rather than just this greenwashing that's happening in the market a lot. But then that creates this problem for retailers. How do they do it in a profitable way? That foundation, again, as a core category, yeah, I think if you looked at a lot of retailers, they probably don't actually make any net profit from the category because they're carrying so much stock and they're having to carry more and more. And the benefit of what Decipher's been doing is that we have on-demand manufacture, which is what enables a totally sustainable approach because none of our products go to landfill or they have no need to. We don't ship products that are never going to be sold, so it reduces the transportation costs. And from a working capital point of view, it's fantastic for a retailer because they only pay for the product after they've sold it. So if a product could be on the shelves for 6 to 9 months before it sells, that's a significant amount of working capital it reduces. We have an offset of that is that they have to pay for the technology, which with a standard brand you wouldn't need to. So there's a lease cost for the machine that produces the product, but the actual product itself is cheaper than buying a fully branded product for the retailer. And all of this we deliver in an accessible way to consumers. Yeah, over time, we're definitely going to see, I think, AI becoming more and more of part of this process. That I think a lot of what's gone before has been a bit gimmicky and a bit faddy, but now we're starting to see technology developments that really are adding to the process. And when we set out to develop Decipher just over a year ago, we really wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to be a fad, that people came for the experience but weren't interested in the product. So it needed to add some value, and that was very important, which we obviously believe that we have. But we're just scratching the surface of what can we also help consumers and retailers do with the information that's freely shared as part of the process of defining the product.
Yeah, definitely. And look, I think you mentioned a couple of very interesting trends. I mean, if we talk about, a sort of what I would call sort of generational shift in the sort of consumption of particularly color cosmetics. And you mentioned a couple of those trends. I mean, sustainability, definitely there. Inclusion as well, definitely part of the sort of generational shift. What sort of other trends are you seeing when it comes to how different generations view makeup consumption? What are the how do you think that's going to impact what brands and retailers do and how they think about, the category overall, looking forward?
Well, lots of ways to think about that. One is the generational shift is huge, particularly when you move to Gen Z. Beauty Bay, as an example, before I joined Beauty Bay, I hadn't really had a lot of exposure to Gen Z. And what you find is there is such a step change in the way that they behave and their expectations. They are kind of the generation of integrity. Their expectations for inclusivity, diversity, and sustainability are much greater than those gone before. And as we normally see that, the youngest generation always has the biggest change, and over time they blur a bit more. But Gen Z really do have. They hold brands to account, and they are not afraid to use the tools at their disposal to call out brands, which we've seen many, many times, particularly with influencers. And I'm slightly off topic, but you see influencers more and more being called out for their behavior and the things that they've done in the past, and some also in the present. That's across product and their behavior as individuals. So
I think. Sorry, I was just going to add to that. So one of the key things that obviously Paul do is research, so independent research into consumer insights. And we did a very large kind of nationwide piece, actually specifically around Gen Z. And what we found was kind of most fascinating is everything that Ross has said is exactly kind of where they're at. But the extra thing is, as a generation, they're hungry for knowledge. They are the most educated group of people online. And I think actually, particularly for the makeup industry, what we're seeing and is going to be a real challenge actually for this kind of space is how to navigate it, is that, they're kind of those artificial layers, those filters, those kind of non-realistic and honest representations of what normal people are like. I think what as a generation they're trying to do is say there is no normal because everyone is unique in their own way. And actually for the makeup category, that's really key when it comes down to personalization of kind of makeup shades, coming down to actually being honest about skin conditions. So many times, there's not just beauty brands that are doing this, but retailers. ASOS have actually been a key one that's pushing in this area to try and start showcasing models with very little to no makeup on and actually exposing kind of what normal, honest skin looks like. And I think as a generation, they really have amazing opportunity to actually move the curve and change the dial completely for both retailers and beauty brands alike. It's a really exciting kind of time actually in the category.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, there's maybe two ways to sort of think about this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. I mean, there's obviously, the impact that the sort of generational shift and, the Gen Z has on, the brands themselves and how do the brands operate. What is the message that the brands send out? What are the products that they develop? But I think there's also another angle to it, which is the technology that the brands use and how these different generations view that technology. So what do you think this means? So if you start from the brand angle, I mean, Hannah, you work with a lot of emerging brands. How do you think they're addressing these generational shifts?
So I think the first thing to kind of say is what a lot of brands are doing right and some are getting wrong is they're blurring the line between brand purpose and social purpose. And I think that's really, really key. A brand purpose really goes fundamentally down to who are you, why are you here, and who are you trying to help? And, when it comes to products, ingredients, there is always a way of restricting who that person is, be that a skin type, a skin tone, whatever it may be. And sometimes what's happening is that brand purpose is getting lost in that social purpose. And you're seeing this kind of really strange disconnect between the messages that are going out there externally and users, particularly Gen Z, aren't really buying it. They really are kind of feeling like they are sometimes not being lied to, but misled. And it's kind of being seen as people are getting on a bit of a bandwagon. And I think that's really key in having that core understanding of the product, who you're here to help, and how can you help them. And once you do that, you have to adapt that accordingly. There were so many brands that kind of jumped on a really important movement, which was the Black Lives Matter movement. And what we really kind of found was that for certain, skin tone inclusive makeup brands that had hundreds and hundreds of ranges within that made sense socially, for a social purpose to kind of be part of it. But there were other brands that didn't. And actually, it kind of grinds. It's quite disjointed against the consumer. And it kind of pushes them away from that brand for that reason. And I think because of that, it's really important that they have a clear understanding of those two. And the experiences that they give align with that messaging. And I think that's really key. One of the key pieces that we found when we did some of our research was over 50% of people felt like what brands claimed they did wasn't actually what the experience they kind of received in the digital world. And I think that's definitely where people are holding kind of brands and consumers are definitely kind of being more vocal about it, in the sense of you have to practice what you preach. And so those digital experiences do need to be key. If you're claiming that from a social purpose, you care, you are absolutely inclusive to every single kind of skin type, skin color, challenge, whatever it may be, you need to make sure that your experiences and the information that you're sharing also follows in those footsteps. And I think that's where the kind of toolings and the things that people are using are letting them down sometimes. And it's really important to hold on to that. Sorry, dog again.
No worries, not a problem. So Ross, if you think about this then from a technology angle, so as Hannah mentioned, the particularly the younger generations, are looking for this type of honesty and really sort of truthfulness from the brands and making sure that there's great alignment between what the brands actually do and what they say they do. What do you think this means, like, for these brands and retailers from the perspective of the technology that they deploy in order to produce a customer experience, for example, for the consumer? Do you think it has any impact there?
Well, we obviously pay a lot of attention to the tech space overall, not just with what we do. And it's quite interesting when you look at demographic profiles that there's not the age pocketing that you would probably expect. That technology now is being adopted by all ages. Now there are skeptics in each age range, and there are people who are more pro. But what we see as being more important is about the integration, and it's about gamification of the process and about the payoff to the consumer that we've all seen lots of sites previously try and garner as much data as they possibly can from their customers without a payoff. And that's created some skepticism from some audiences. But we do see now that customers are looking more and more for an immersed experience that isn't just, well, here's a piece of tech that's in the middle of the website for whatever part of the process, that doesn't integrate effectively with the recommendation for what happens at the end. That a lot of people previously and brands have installed bits of tech, and then you get to the end of it and the process falls because it hasn't been installed properly, or people haven't thought through the journey as much as they should do, and you either get a bad recommendation because you become an outlier and you fall outside of the core, and they say, well, default position is product X, and you look at that and it destroys the credibility of the technology. And I think what we're seeing now is, organizations like Revieve are doing a much better job of working with retailers to deliver a better experience for the customer, and also a more commercially viable proposition that it's doing more for the brand, more for the retailer. And I think that means it's getting more prominence within the organization. I think it comes partly from CTOs having more input into what happens within brands and retailers now than they would have done a few years ago, partly driven by the pandemic. Of this huge shift to online and digital services has had a very positive impact for brands, retailers, and I think overall for the industry. People are being more creative and are being a bit more daring, I think, a bit more experimental with what they can do, which I think will be a good thing for all of us longer term. And it's probably not a long time away before we start to see some of this stuff as a hygiene factor in the buying process. It really will become necessary to keep up with competition. And it'll be really interesting to see how it develops over the next sort of 3, 4, 5 years as we've moved out of that kind of gimmicky situation to something that really will drive revenue and, more importantly, an improved experience for customers and consumers to create that loyalty.
Yeah, definitely. Look, and I think you're absolutely right. I absolutely agree with your sentiment there. I think that technology does have a big role to play, in order to deliver that really personalized sort of customer experience to the consumer. And something like you said, it's not just on the sidelines. It's not just slapped on a website somewhere, but it's actually central to the experience that the consumer gets. And I think that is definitely a world that I see emerging as well. So how do you think about in this world of increased consumer expectations, as well as the need to adopt more technology, as well as the technologies themselves maturing, like you said, Ross? How do you think about, if you're a retail and brand, how do you think about different strategies around omni-channel, for example, which is a concept that has been around for forever, it feels like. How do you think about that? I mean, should you even think about channels anymore at all?
Yeah, it's a really good question that I've personally been in debates quite a few times of, well, what's the right route of how do you prioritize between channels? How do you create consistency and consistent touch points between channels? And whether that's physically where you are, of online or in store, or whether it's down to the channel that you're communicating with, that I'm sure during the rest of this hour we'll talk more about social media and the importance. But if you look at TikTok, Snap, etc., they are so different to the traditional platforms that have come before. Now, the traditional platforms are still there, so social media teams are stretching further and further across a more diverse and fragmented field, which makes it harder to create, and particularly given the nature of those channels, harder to create a consistent experience to a consumer, which is absolutely critical in the modern day. That if you break your brand experience, your brand promise, and your values, you can't get away with it. So it becomes more expensive, becomes much harder to compete, and harder to have longevity as well. So I think you have to treat your channels as much as physically possible as one entity, but obviously being sympathetic to the fact that they are totally different in so many ways. And omnichannel is the future. Whether you're talking about big brands or brands like us, Decipher long-term can't be a D2C brand and have the scale that it needs to achieve its objectives. We have to be working longer term with retail partners and ultimately with brands. And that takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of thought as well. But yeah, definitely agree. Omnichannel is the only way that you can really do it in the future.
And Hannah, how are you? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to add to that really quickly. I think there's omni-channel is kind of, it was always here, it's not going away. I think the marketplace is one that a lot of brands as well are really kind of forgetting. And every touch point has a purpose, and sometimes the assumption is every single touch point has to have the same experience, and that actually isn't the case. Leave the marketplace as it is. It does a really good job. It ticks a box. Everyone understands how it works, and you need to be on there and functioning and aware of how it works and work better with your retailers. But kind of your D2C experience could actually be completely different to that. That's where you bring kind of the value adds. The social media side, that's obviously so key, and I'd love to talk about that a bit more at some point. But I think as well, internally for brands, you mentioned CTOs earlier, that's really key, but I think the online experience doesn't just have one person controlling it anymore. There's CMOs, CIOs, you're having creatives. There's so many different people that actually have a stake in that, what externally as a consumer you see as one central place, but there are so many factors a part of it that you do have to have a really, really strong strategy and a really strong understanding of, okay, if they leave this platform, where do we want them to go next? How do we continue that experience and that message all the way through, so that the communication and the language that's being used is the same, but sometimes the outcome and what they're getting might be a bit different depending on where they are, where they start and where they finish.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a very good point. And what I was going to ask you, Hannah, in particular, is, you obviously get to work with a lot of emerging brands, and there are particular channels that today are a necessity, and other ones that are growing in importance very rapidly in terms of engagement, but maybe soon in terms of commerce as well. So you talk about TikTok, for example. How do you see these brands how ready are they in terms of thinking about these strategies? Like, what is the purpose of a particular channel? Is it for commerce? Is it for engagement? Which part of that experience for the consumer does that particular channel play a role? Do you see that brands have a good grasp of this, or are getting better here? And how do you look at that?
Do you know what? It's a really good question. It's a really hard one to answer because there's such a range. You could have massive global brands that have their own research teams that ask every question under the sun and understand their consumer backwards. And then you have smaller brands that also understand their consumer, but in a completely different way. And I think fundamentally, what it comes down to is, who is your target audience? Who is your consumer? Where are they? And then you work out how to communicate with them. So a lot of sometimes mistakes brands make is they come to us, we have a social media team, and to be honest, they are now in every single conversation across the business because it's such a pivotal point of that experience. But it comes down to, they'll be like, we want to be on TikTok. That's brilliant. Why? Who is, but then actually their target audience might be kind of 40 and above, and they're trying to target someone that's got old skin, for example. And it's like, okay, that's great. You still need to be present on these channels because you want to bring in a younger audience and a younger consumer to your brand. But if 70% of your sales happen with the older kind of generation, you need to understand where they are and what they respond to. TikTok as a platform is fantastic, and it's evolving at such an aggressive rate. Everyone knows that TikTok's obviously working a million miles an hour to kind of really bring the e-commerce element of the platform to life. Instagram's already doing a brilliant job at that. Snapchat is absolutely snapping at everyone's heels to try and kind of bring itself back at the forefront. Snapchat's still very much seen as that kind of younger generation. My sister's 17 and she doesn't WhatsApp her friends, she Snapchats them. It's these ways in which people are using technology are completely evolving. But fundamentally, it comes down to one thing: who are you trying to talk to and where are they? And that is a mistake that brands of all shapes and sizes make. The pleasure of working with some of the smaller ones is they want to disrupt. They want to be seen as a disruptor. They don't want to go with convention. And that gives you some really exciting opportunities when it comes to the type of content and even the experiences that you start playing with. And I think that's really key as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, to your point, it is sometimes quite hard for a lot of these brands to distinguish. I mean, there is there's so much value to be gained from a lot of these social media platforms, that it's often, it can become blinding in terms of really understanding what is the purpose, why are we here? What is the function? What is the part of the customer experience that being on one of these platforms serves? What are we looking to accomplish for our audience in particular, right? So let me ask you this as a follow-up question. I mean, obviously, some of these social media platforms have been around for a while, and some of them are newer, like TikTok, and there's been, over the years, there's been quite a lot of talk about, these social media platforms really, moving from engagement into the actual commerce, the side of things. Is that now something that we're seeing? Is that now here to stay? Is it that these channels are now finally evolving into actual points of purchase, or is that is that something that's gonna fade away at some point?
The what's really interesting is these platforms, they're very savvy. They've learned, why would we give the control away? Why would we send someone to another platform when we have them here? And I think actually, not just that, it comes back to the kind of thing I said very much at the beginning, is as a consumer, we're very impatient. We want it now. We want it yesterday. We want you to already know what I want, and for me to be able to have the quickest route to getting the product I want. We have a very small window of opportunity to capture in these things. And I think, from a commerce point of view, these larger platforms, they understand that. I think there's lots of other things that are entering the marketplace. I think loyalty schemes is really key. I think people sometimes underestimate the power of reviews. I think brands are really cottoning on to, that word of mouth is more powerful. Gen Z in particular, one of the things I found really interesting from some of our research is that over 50% of Gen Z give a second person word of mouth recommendation, which actually basically means that they haven't experienced it personally, but they're recommending a brand based on what someone else has told them on their own experience. And friends and family are becoming even bigger from an influencer point of view. Influencers are really powerful in this space. I know Rosh touched on that earlier, and they're not going anywhere, but people are also getting a little bit of fatigue in that area sometimes. And so actually we have to kind of look at other options to be, again, more genuine and more real with that brand. So yeah, I'm not surprised that these platforms are going that direction. It's not going away. It's actually going to just kind of, I think, evolve and become bigger, and they're going to have better tooling, better opportunities for brands to actually work directly that way. So integration to these platforms is key, making sure that the technologies and the systems that you have are able to seamlessly connect as much as possible within these other platforms that you use. I think is going to be really important moving forward. But yeah, for me, it's the future. Absolutely.
I think what's really interesting is you're seeing the traditional platforms that are trying to apply after the fact of bringing commerce into their infrastructure, and then you have the newer platforms like Agora, who are it's baked in, it's what they were always intended to do. And I think you'll see them do a much better job as they start to scale. It's basically produced to sell beauty products, and it's very clear. Their business model is clear, and it offers, not doing a sales pitch on Agora, but they have it's much more catered towards the needs of particularly disruptive brands to do something a bit different.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, Ross, maybe you can touch on this, because I think one of the things, as we look at this sort of landscape and you look at, these different channels where the retailers and brands need to be present, where they need to engage the consumer, some of them are that end up being sort of actual, point of sales. But one thing that strikes me is that the importance of data and data about the consumer, understanding the consumer, that is going to get more important, but it's also going to get magnitudes, by an order of magnitude, more complex, because you're not just dealing with your own channel, your own store, your own website. You're dealing with all these other third parties. So how do you look at that from if you're a brand or a retailer?
It was very topical for us because we spent quite a lot of this week talking about data and how we use it. We're now getting ready to scale our brand, and we now have a reasonable amount of data. But there's two questions that we're answering or trying to answer. One is, how do we gather more data in the future? And how do we manage that data in an effective way? We're a small team. We don't have a data scientist on board, and we won't have for some time. So it's how can we use the tools that are out there to cost effectively and efficiently take the data and figure out what we need to do. And what's becoming harder and harder is to gather the data with changes in privacy policy and the impact that's had. I'm sure we're not the only brand around that's seen some very significant impact in one way or another from the changes that are happening, then that will continue to happen. And I think you'll see more and more businesses and organizations that will either add to their current repertoire, data management, or that will spring up that will help you to understand more about where have your customers been, where are they going. One of the headaches I have is truly understanding attribution. Where did this customer come from? From a D2C point of view, I have probably 4 or 5 ways to map where a customer's been, and none of them correlate. They don't. Every platform gives me a different answer. If we use Shopify, that will tell me one thing, and even within the platform, it will say, it'll be clear it's come from an email from MailChimp, for example, but it will say, come from Google. And I think that's going to be a really big challenge for smaller brands as they try and navigate their way through who's the customer, which channels work, which was not only the last click attribution, but which of these tools that can be not just CRM and social media platforms, but also technology tools, which was the bit of the journey that actually closed the sale, which was the most important, which gives me the ROI, where should I invest my money? And historically, in recent years, it's got better and better. And I think that era is probably over. It's going to become a lot harder and a lot more sophisticated to get the answers you really need. So that's one of the things that we look at the moment is we're talking to agencies and we're talking to people who can help us to get that data, to garner more data. And then more importantly, what do we do with it? How does it help us build the profile that we're still emerging? We still don't have a crystal clear view of who the optimum customer is, who has the best LTV, who's most likely to buy on visit 3 as opposed to visit 10. These things we don't really know yet. All we know is that our brand proposition is relevant to pretty much everybody.
Yeah, it's certainly, this is a very, very, I think, a very tough challenge for a lot of brands these days. It's as you look at, and it almost feels like, particularly sort of pre-COVID, it almost feels like, brands and retailers were getting there in terms of really understanding their customer from the point of view of their channels. And then now you see obviously not just sort of social media channels, but you see a whole sort of explosion of different touch points, and they happen, quite sort of sporadically. So I think exactly what you mentioned, really understanding what was that influence, which are all the parts of that sort of exposure to your brand that really influence that sale. I think that is going to become a lot more important, certainly for the brands, but also a lot more challenging. So it's almost like it got easier and easier and easier, and all of a sudden it's getting harder, just like you mentioned. So I think
it's going to be a bit of a barrier of entry to new creative brands that are coming to the market with really creative and interesting stories that struggle to scale. That it's going to become harder and harder, which is a real shame. And it'd be interesting to see how the market evolves, of whether it's the marketplace approach that the distribution is consistent, or whether it's collaborations between indie brands to give them some scale to the platform and help each other grow. But I think it's going to be interesting to see.
Definitely. I have one last topic that I want to cover here. I think this has been a really excellent discussion. We've seen also over the last sort of couple of years, we've seen kind of this, let's say, convergence between, skincare and makeup and health and well-being. And we've even seen a lot of brands a lot of beauty brands, or what you would traditionally describe as beauty brands, who talk about themselves as, wellness brands or well-being companies. How do you think this is going to impact, first of all, do you see this trend? And secondly, how do you think this is going to impact the strategies of these brands going forward?
So from my perspective, we're patrons of the British Beauty Council. That's something we're really passionate about. And at British Beauty Week, there was a really fascinating kind of topic and panel around the spa industry. And I think what was really interesting about that industry is that there are so many spas that are now evolving to wellness centres. And I think there's definitely a trend within here where from aromatherapy. There are so many ways in which you can use essential oils to actually help medicate, from a mental health point of view. There's so many more things. And I think people are starting to cotton on to the connection between that. Even from a hairdressing perspective, it's coming up as a topic. There is a direct connection between mental health, particularly for women, and hair, be that makeup, be that whatever it may be. I think the thing I find kind of the most exciting on that journey is it's really going to empower and open up so many more opportunities for brands to actually really be seen as a force for good and make a massive impact in that space. And I think that's starting to also emerge in the types of ingredients that they're using in their products. And I would agree that we're definitely starting to see more and more kind of I'll call them a hybrid product, so to speak, of bringing kind of the skincare and the makeup world together. And I think there's a mixture of reasons for that. Number one, that people are trying to feel good from the inside out. I think that's really key. I think everything that we've all learned as individuals and as society over the last 2 years has shown us and reminded us that self-care is really, really important in many ways. And I think the second one is during that process, our relationship with products completely changed. I know I'm wearing makeup now, but I wear makeup substantially less a lot of the time. And I think actually that's a really important thing. And I think because of that, as women and men and whoever kind of is using these products, we've learned that our canvas is really key. And that's where this opportunity for these products to come in is really there, is rather than just kind of masking what's underneath, it's actually, can it be seen as kind of a force of good and help improve, plump out the skin. There's a lot of kind of acids and serums that are being included in makeup at the moment. So rather than just covering that canvas, it's can we support the canvas, improve the canvas to then get better results and longer lasting results of those products. And I think that's definitely something I believe, will kind of stay. That very present in hair care, has been for a long time. Skincare is absolutely there as well. And I think kind of spas and these other beauty brands are really starting to kind of cotton onto this opportunity, evolve, and now we're starting to see it in makeup, which I think is a really, really exciting time.
Yeah, I totally agree with Hannah that everything you just said. It's going to be a very interesting time. I think we'll see more and more convergence between, in the beauty space as a whole, between makeup, skincare, and also into supplements and wellness and the things that ultimately help you achieve the goal that will make you look younger or more attractive, which is what the industry is really about. It'd be really interesting to see how they come to market. And I think probably as you see more M&A activity, more consolidation across some of the brands, there'll be more opportunity of brand X featuring brand Y, as well as just the commodity side of featuring ingredient X. I think that'll be really interesting to see, which has been very successful in some other markets. And I think the blurring of lines is a good thing. I think it brings innovation to the category. And I think it probably strengthens the bigger organizations. And again, it's probably something else that makes life harder for the smaller brands. But I think it's probably good for the category overall.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think I think it is a very good thing overall for the category. I mean, because I think with what it does for the entire beauty space or the broader beauty space is really focused on the outcomes. What is the consumer looking for? What is the objective that they have? Which maybe, as you said, Ross, to look better, feel better, look younger, and I think it is really, really healthy from that perspective. So definitely agree. I want to thank you both, Hannah and Ross. This has been a really, really informative, exciting discussion. I've really enjoyed doing this with you. And I hope to see you guys very, very, very shortly. Hopefully in person as well. So thank you very much for joining in. Everyone, again, my guests, Hannah Keats from Pull Agency and Ross Beagrie from Decipher. And thank you very much for participating.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us.
What an insightful event we've had. I wish to thank our amazing guests and panelists, as well as everyone in the audience for joining us today. And I can't wait to see where the industry is headed. Thank you.